The movie is called Vanilla Sky, and the main character is David Ames Jr. David is a young CEO of a large magazine printing company that he inherited from his father, but David chooses to relinquish his responsibilities in running the company and chooses to live more freely. At the beginning of the film, David is seen waking from his sleep with a whisper, "Open your eyes." And he wakes up with a stressed face, like a person who is tired from work. David then drove his car, but then he panicked when he realized that the streets he was driving through had no signs of life at all, even though the surrounding buildings seemed to be lit up. David got out of his car, ran and screamed in fear, thinking he was alone in the world. He immediately awoke from his sleep and realized that it was all just his nightmare. This is where the story begins. David is a handsome playboy who is admired by women, and when he woke up, there was a woman in David's bed who had apparently slept with him the night before. The woman's name was Julie. Julie loved David very much and hoped that one day he would marry her. But David considered her a casual sex friend, nothing more. At the office, David was seen as playing around and not taking his role as the head of the company too seriously. To make a long story short, one night at his birthday party, David met a very beautiful woman. The woman's name was Sophia, and she came with her boyfriend Brian. David was intrigued by the woman and fell in love at first sight with Sophia, who had a simple and unglamorous appearance. She was different from the other women David had met, but at the party, Julie, still hoping for David's love, kept watching David and couldn't accept that David was close to another woman. David felt that Julie had gone too far and was stalking him. And because of the situation, David invited Sophia to go somewhere else to avoid Julie. At first, Sophia didn't seem very interested in David, but as David continued to seduce her, she began to enjoy chatting with him. When he returned from the party, David took Sophia home with him. At Sophia's house, David constantly explored Sophia's personality, which made David fall in love even deeper. Their moments together were filled with jokes and laughter. They painted together, listened to music together, and did many other things. Until the moment when David wanted to go home, Sophia asked David to lend her his eyes, because Sophia wanted to kiss David's forehead. However, Sophia accidentally kissed David on the lips, and he was embarrassed. As he left Sophia's house, it turned out that Julie was waiting outside for David. Julie then invited David to get into her car for a ride. But that was the biggest mistake of David's life. If only David hadn't listened to Julie and gotten into the car, maybe David and Sophia would still be together. But no. Julie was pronounced dead in the accident, while David survived, but his right arm was paralyzed, and one side of his face was severely damaged. And now David is no longer the handsome man who easily charmed women. And because the medical science of plastic surgery was not very developed at that time, no matter how much David paid the best doctors in town, the doctors still did not know how to restore David's face to its original state. In order to protect his face and at the same time speed up the healing process, David had to wear a white silicone mask that had the function of restoring the skin cells on his face. But on one condition, David had to wear the mask for an entire year, folks. David was stressed because he had to wait a year to see Sophia again. Because of the condition of his face, it was impossible for him to see the woman he loved. David's easygoing nature has now turned 180 degrees, and at one point, David, who couldn't stand it because he missed Sophia so much, finally worked up the courage to see her. And when Sophia saw David's face for the first time since he disappeared, she was shocked. But because Sophia was a nice person, she was able to hide her feelings and pretend that David's face wasn't so bad. When David heard this, he was happy and invited Sophia to a party at a nightclub with his friend Brian. That night at the club, Sophia continued to feel uncomfortable with David's drunken behavior and his ugly face. David also told Sophia to tell the truth about his face, because David actually knew that Sophia was pretending to like David. But Sophia, who felt bad, didn't want to say it. and then told David that,
"I'll tell you in another life when we are both cats."
When David heard that, he laughed out loud and said that,
"I'll tell you in another life when we are both cats."
Okay, long story short, they finally went home. And on the way home, Sophia said that she wanted to go home first, without needing a ride. Not long after that, Brian said the same thing, guys. And from there, David thought that since he disappeared and showed up with his ugly face, Sophia had left David and was in a relationship with his own best friend, Brian. Imagining this, David was really disappointed and ran after Sophia. But because he was too drunk, David ended up falling and losing consciousness. The next morning, David woke up to the sound of Sophia whispering something.
"Open your eyes."
When he woke up, Sophia said that she still loved David very much. And it turned out that the image of Sophia and Brian's relationship the night before was just David's imagination because he was drunk. Eventually, they both went home and have been living together ever since. One day came when the process of healing David's face from the mask was finished because David had been wearing the mask for a year. So the day came when David took off the mask for the first time. And when the mask was opened,
Bad is it?
David's face was healed and normal. David was now a handsome man again, and that made Sophia very happy. Day after day passed happily between them. But since then, David had bad dreams, guys, like when he woke up and looked in the mirror and his face was ugly again, and other bad dreams. David feels happy now, but he also feels that all his current happiness is just a dream. Then one morning when David woke up, it turned out that the woman sleeping next to him was supposed to be Sophia, but her face had changed to Julie. Julie was supposed to have died in an accident. David suddenly panicked, and when David checked all of Sophia's photos and belongings at her house, it turned out that all of the photos had changed faces to that of Julie. Then, because he was very panicked and disbelieving, because all this time it had turned out that Sophia was Julie and Julie was Sophia, David then took a pillow and held Sophia down until Sophia could not breathe and died. David was eventually imprisoned for murder. There he met a psychologist who followed him around and listened to David's story after story. The psychologist actually wanted to find out the motive for David's murder because the police thought he was insane because he felt he hadn't killed Sophia, but Julie. But the psychologist actually became very close to David and cared for him. And because they were so close, David had come to think of him as his own father, who had died when David was a child, leaving him only his company. David also said that everything he had experienced up to the moment of the murder felt like a dream. Even the face he thought he had healed was just a dream. But he didn't know why. Finally, after all of the psychologist's tasks were considered complete, the psychologist left. But it was then that David finally remembered that he had once visited a company called Life Extension. This company was where people who felt their lives were destroyed, such as the elderly, the seriously ill, and so on, came to be frozen in a capsule at a very cold temperature, and later the person will be hibernated or put to sleep for many years, or even decades or even centuries, so that the person's life will be changed, moving from real life to dream life. If the person is unlucky and suffering in real life, he will be free to realize whatever he wants in his dream. If he is seriously ill in real life, he will be healthy in his dream. And if the person has just broken up with someone like David, then in his dream, he will be very harmonious with Sophia again. And this dream world is called a lucid dream. But David also asked what it would be like if his dream turned into a nightmare, like the one he was having right now. Well, the company's customer service said that he would not be alone in the dream world. He would be accompanied and guided by a technician. Finally, David realized that what he was experiencing was just a dream. He panicked, ran, called for the technician, and said that his dream had turned into a nightmare. The technician came and explained everything to David. It turned out that David had followed Sophia home from the club one night until he fell. The next day, David never saw Sophia again. Since then, David began to accept his condition as it was and began to seriously manage his business until it became successful and advanced. But in the midst of the hustle and bustle, David felt lonely every night and always missed Sophia. Until the feeling of longing became unbearable, David finally found a lucid dream company on the internet. David signed a contract with the company, and then he fell asleep in a comfortable bed and was put into a capsule. Since then, David has been presumed dead, and his best friend Brian held a 3-day memorial service at David's house. But since David's death, there was someone who would never be able to forget him. David, who thought Sophia had abandoned him, was wrong. Sophia never forgot him, not even for a second. But it was Sophia who would never heal. When he finally reached the top of the building, the technician said that he had fixed his nightmare problem and that everything was back to normal. Now all David has to do is choose whether to continue in his dream world or wake up from his sleep and return to the real world. But the real world will be very different from what David remembers, for David has been asleep for hundreds of years. David's financial condition is not what it used to be, and he is very thin. But David has finally decided to stay awake, and as bitter as it may be, reality is still better than the dream world. And before David jumped off the building, he had one last request to meet Sophia. When he met Sophia, David said this:
Look at us. I'm frozen and you're dead. I lost you when I got in that car. I'm sorry.
I'll find you again.
I'll see you in another life when we are both cats.
Then David jumped off the building and finally woke up.
Thanks, David. Open your eyes.
And the movie ends.